Habakkuk chapter 1, we read, this is the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not hear, or cry to you violence and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me, strife and contention arise. And so the law is paralyzed and justice never goes forth, for the wicked surround the righteous. So justice goes forth perverted. Again, this is from the Old Testament book of Habakkuk, and it's not necessarily a section of the Bible that many of us are very familiar with. I think I actually encourage you to become familiar with this. This is one of the Old Testament prophets. So you notice the way that it is written. This is Hebrew literature. Habakkuk is a prophet who lived, we think, in the 7th century BC. So we were in the Gospel of John. Now we're doing a really far throwback, if you will. A couple important historical things for you to know for this to make any sense, and I won't bore you with too much of them. This is in the time which is before Judah is exiled. Okay, so if you've heard of the Babylonian exile, this is the time that is leading up to that. Israel, the nation of Israel, here's one important detail, is divided into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. One particularly important thing is that Assyria conquers the northern kingdom 722 BC. We also know that Babylon is going to conquer the southern kingdom, right, let's say 586, as they begin to be deported to Babylon. Okay, Habakkuk is in here. Habakkuk is in between these two things. Let's put him at about middle of the 7th century BC, so something like 640, maybe 615, something like that. This is BC. This is before Christ. Habakkuk is a prophet who is somebody who speaks for God. Okay, so largely one of the unique things, Brian and Lincoln, about Habakkuk is that much of this is a dialogue. There's lots of different forms of literature here, but we see that Habakkuk isn't recording a lot of then this happened and this happened and this happened narrative. Habakkuk is actually giving us insight into his conversation that he has with God. As a matter of fact, the beginning word that we get is that this is an oracle. Other observations, what are the things that we should notice? This is just the beginning of it. As we read it, I think I'll end there with historical aspects of it. What do you notice just from the text, guys?
It's interesting that his oracle, this is a prophetic utterance that he's giving. It was meant for the benefit of Judah in particular, but it is formed as a conversation. Right. His first section that we're looking at is kind of in the form of a lament,
right?
Lamenting, yep. and then the conversation picks up in the next section.
Right. So all of this, it sounds like it's Habakkuk lamenting.
Mm-hmm.
What does that word mean, Brian? When you just even that word lament, does it just mean to be sad?
Well, if you just look at the content of it, there is this crying out to God about obviously the theme of this is the injustice, the wrong that he's seen.
Yeah.
So he is sorrowful over these things, but it's sorrowful in sort of this Godward direction.
Right.
Like, God, you can do something about this. So why?
What's going? Yeah. I appreciate how you said that. So a sorrowful in a Godward direction. Yeah. Really helpful. Yeah. Other things. Let's talk text.
One of the other things that strikes me is if we were to read all the other prophets, that none of them start like this. Right, often the prophets are addressing issues going on in Israel and confronting the Israelites on behalf of God. What's striking about this one is that this prophet is confronting God.
Right. Yeah. So he's engaging God on some things that he's seeing. Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And it seems like, again, there's this issue of justice seems to be a very important issue, at least just textually. Even before this idea of seeing violence but not saving, is that it's not the word justice, but that is one of the key themes of Habakkuk. Maybe that would be a similarity then, Lincoln, if that's a difference you're bringing out, a similarity here with Habakkuk, in especially the book of the 12 minor prophets, is this theme of justice. God, you say this is the right thing, this is uprightness, but it doesn't seem like uprightness is being upheld, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else just strike you as we read it?
Mm-hmm. I think verse 4, where he specifically says the law is paralyzed. Typically with the prophets, even in the New Testament, when you see the word law, it's referring to the Torah, or
that's
the Jewish law.
Yeah,
the Mosaic law. And so, perhaps, what Habakkuk is talking about is there's all this injustice, maybe within Israel that's happening, that the law is not actually being obeyed. And so he's saying, God, why are you not doing something about, like, your own people perverting, that's the word there at the end of verse 4, perverting justice, perverting the law. Like they're warping and corrupting this thing.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about what might be happening here. The law is paralyzed, or the law, it almost feels like the law is frozen. And again, justice and the law, again, what does that mean for an ancient Israelite? This idea of Torah is what he's using there, that this is not, it's not happening, right? And again, this is where those historical aspects come in that Habakkuk is probably speaking to the southern kingdom. Let's put him at about 620 BC. We know that the northern kingdom has been judged by Assyria. Okay, so that's happened already. Remember, we've got count backwards here because this is BC. So 722 has happened. Assyria has come and judged Israel because of their disobedience. So God's people themselves have become so corrupt that Habakkuk is like, what's going on, God? You're not doing anything about this because look at all this wickedness that's happened, right? Am I getting that right, Brian? And that law he's probably talking about is the Torah. God's people, God set up his people as a kingdom with kings, and that law is paralyzed. He might be talking about Manasseh and some of the wicked kings in Judah who sacrificed their own children and did other such wickedness. Are there other sort of injustices that would probably be happening, or wicked surrounding the righteous? I'm just trying to get a feel for what he might be talking about.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that what Lincoln said earlier, that he is kind of confronting God on, on Israel's behalf, but really, like, because Israel has gone so wayward, he's questioning God, why are you allowing this to happen? Why are you allowing your people to get this wicked? Verse 3, why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong?
Yeah.
Or I cry to you violence, and will you not save? Like, God, you could step in and change this people. Now, like, the whole book of Habakkuk is that God is going to give a very shocking answer,
right,
to Habakkuk.
Yeah.
Sort of the tension in it is that he's not going to get the answer he wants.
Right. Sure. Go ahead, Link.
Yeah, one of the other things I noticed about this is this idea of the law being paralyzed. Verse 4 seems like it's in contrast to verse 3, where strife and contention are arising. The violence, strife, contention, division, that is growing. And in context, the law of God, which is all that is good for mankind and for life, that is being paralyzed. That cannot move. So it seems like evil and wickedness are spreading, whereas goodness and the righteousness of God can't move. It's paralyzed.
Right. So look at those words that Lincoln's bringing up. Verse 3, we already mentioned this idea of violence, iniquity, wrong, destruction, more violence, strife, contention. So historically, there's a thing that is happening in God's people, right, where it looks like they're not obeying. And Habakkuk is this whole oracle, or burden, could be another translation. Habakkuk has this burden. That's what that word oracle means. He's burdened. And the thing that the content of his burden, this is an oracle, but God, he almost seems then to say, in light of what is happening, I'm going to go and talk to God about it. He actually laments. He has a complaint against God. So now let's talk about the content of Habakkuk's questions here. What is he? So that's maybe what's happening. Law is paralyzed. God's people aren't living like God's people. Now, what is he asking of God? He's saying now, well, there's some questions that he has, and that's one of the repetitions up here, is this, question mark. That's something that we should certainly see. What do you guys make of what he's asking God?
One of the things I noticed is how visual it is. This is an oracle that Habakkuk saw, verse 1. And then verse 3, why do you make me see iniquity? And why do you idly look at wrong? Even this idea of destruction and violence are before me. So Habakkuk is seeing something, and he thinks God is also seeing something that's very disturbing. And seemingly God's not doing anything about it.
Right.
He's idle.
Yeah. Why is God seem to be so passive? Would that be one of the questions of Habakkuk? I think so. Yeah, I'm just trying to rephrase this to try to understand what his complaint is, because this is his burden. Like, people are, quote, living like hell. I don't think that's an exaggeration. And these are God's people, we believe, in Judah. And why aren't you doing anything about it is Habakkuk's question.
Mm-hmm. And you get the impression this isn't the first time, the first time that Habakkuk has brought this to God's attention. Verse 2, how long shall I cry for help? Like, there's this length of pleading with God to act. Yeah,
that's right. So it seems like on one hand, he is asking God. He seems like, I have been asking for something here because I'm your prophet. He's a guy who's in full-time ministry, so to speak. And it seems like God does not hear him. Is that be one? God does not seem to hear his prayers. That seems to be what he's saying. Okay. Yeah. What are other angles? It seems like there's another angle. It seems like he's saying, well, not only does God seem like it's been a long time, hence the how long. Seems like God doesn't hear. It seems like God does not save, or God isn't acting, right? It's not only that God isn't hearing him. Yeah. How do you say it, Link?
God seems distant. God is acting distant.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So there's a distantness. There's a God seems silent. There's an inaction, but there's also an injustice, which seem to go together, right? There is a silence. Heaven seems silent to Habakkuk. And it doesn't seem like not only personally in silent, but there's also seems to be an inactivity, that God is not enacting what he says he will enact, right? And one of the reasons for this is, one of the interesting things to notice is he says, how long, oh Lord? So he's speaking to God very, very personally and saying, God, we know you're the covenant keeping God. We know you have a people for yourself. You know, you claim that you're going to do all these good things. What gives? And I think that's just very instructive, because that's how Habakkuk is talking to God, right? I think I agree with you, Brian. This is a lament.
Yeah. Well, it's, even if you go back to the covenant, the giving of the law and everything, there was sort of the blessings and the curses, for keeping or failing to keep the law. And here it's really clear that Israel is not keeping the law. In fact, they've gotten to the point that Habakkuk is saying it's paralyzed. You crippled it, and yet it seems like God is not holding up his end of the bargain. Like you said, if they did these things, you would step in and you would, you bring calamity on them and whatnot. And yet you're letting them go.
Right.
Yeah. So
what do you guys know about this name? When the Old Testament uses this, this is what is being used here, is this idea of Lord, caps. The Old Testament makes a point when we see that, and sometimes we miss that. Can we just briefly talk about it? Because Habakkuk here is using the name of God to say, oh Lord, what's going on? That seems important.
Right. Like what's in the original Hebrew it wouldn't say Lord, it would say Yahweh, the proper name of God.
Right. So, and the reason for that is that's an indicative of this God being the covenant keeping God, right? This is the God that made promises to Abraham and Isaac and to Jacob to make them into a great nation. And in you, all the peoples of the world will be blessed. I'll make you a light for the nations, and other people will come to know God because of Israel. And now the northern kingdom's been wiped out, and Judah is looking really, really bad.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. He's saying, God, you're the covenant keeping God. We have this vision for what your good purpose is going to be, And when I'm seeing, reality does not match that expectation. There's a mismatch, and I'm kind of wondering what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe to jump, kind of moving toward application, but I think maybe a connection with us is that, the covenant name of God, Yahweh, and all the promises that come with that, you could do a similar jump and say, well, we have promises in the scripture in the New Testament, that clearly God has made to us. God says he works all things together for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. And then you look around at the world right now and you're like, well, I don't know how this quarantine thing is working out for my good. Like, perhaps we feel a little bit of this tension, in the same way. Like, God, you made a promise, but it seems like it's not being fulfilled right now.
Heaven seems silent, and you do not seem to have the experience of the promises of God. Yeah, go ahead, Link. You're going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the way you guys have said that he's just seeing that reality does not match up with these promises that God has given, that God would bring together a people who would shine as lights in a dark world, and through these people, God would bless the nations. And man, I think that, like you're saying, Brian, getting us there already, man, we see that in our day today, that how often is that true? And the lament here is not for his culture. The lament here is primarily for the people of God, right? That they are the ones propagating injustice. And so, I mean, I think that maybe one way this sort of directs our lament is, it's not wrong to lament, I think, for our world, but I think especially we should lament for the failures within the community of God's people to live the way God's called us to.
Yeah. Well, what a fitting occasion. My goodness, what an interesting thing. Like, we don't often think about God in this way. You don't often hear of people saying, let's just do think through Habakkuk and a minor prophet. But it's certainly relatable. Here's somebody who seems to care about the purpose of God, the idea of justice going forward. Like, I know we're always mixed bags, right? But we want to see God's purpose go forward. We don't want to see people cheat other people. We don't want to see people on lockdown and people die and injustice promoted. We want to see God's glory. We want to see his glory fill the earth. And that's certainly Habakkuk's agenda. And he's really, really disappointed. But the thing it seems like he's disappointed in is God. Right? God isn't meeting his expectations. So I think it's already just a very, very fitting thing. It's a very relatable experience, perhaps, for us already. Right?
It's really helpful. You're saying, Dave, it sounds like it's okay to express disappointment with God.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I mean, can you imagine? I think this already flies in the face of the picture that we often have, that Christians are perpetually happy, clappy people. This kind of prayer life is generally unknown to many believers. This idea of, God, I want to talk to you, and I think there's a disrespectful way to talk to God. Don't get me wrong. I think there is a what gives and a sinful way we can call God into question. But it does seem like lament and a conversation with God is really appropriate. And I think it's the how long. I think it's why. I think it's calling out to God. It's crying. It's bringing a complaint to the one who can actually do something about it. I think that's what we see in Habakkuk chapter 1. Yeah.
Dave, what do you think makes the difference? I appreciate you making the distinction, because, like, you look at this and you're like, can I talk to God like this? And I think yes, but what do you think makes the distinction between the distinction that you're making when it becomes a sinful complaint to a godly lament like Habakkuk is doing?
That's a great question. As a matter of fact, we just talked about that last Thursday when we had our large group meeting, and I can't exactly remember how I answered the question, so maybe Lincoln can help me out. But I do think there's a difference between raising your hands to heaven with an open hand and raising your hands to heaven with a clenched fist. I think those are different, right? I think one of them seeks answers. And what we're going to see is there's a progression, and that there's actually a parallelism between Habakkuk chapter 1, the way this begins, and Habakkuk chapter 3. In other words, some of those same Hebrew verbs are going to pop up in chapter 3, where Habakkuk has this psalm or a song where he comes to this resolution of what it means to live by faith. So we're actually going to see that. And I think that might make the difference, Brian. I think the difference is actually whether or not there's an open hand question which can move toward God and actually be receptive, or a shaking of the fist to heaven. Shaking of the fist to heaven is never commended.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying that there's this honesty, you know, there's sort of this brutal honesty in here, but there's also this humility, you know, coupled in here. And I think the fact that he starts with, "Oh Yahweh, oh Lord," you know, sort of starts to set the tone for that he's not doing this alone in a corner somewhere. He's actually talking to God about this. He's not just complaining about what God is doing, but talking to him.
Yeah, that's right.
I look forward to getting to chapter 3.
Yeah, we're already talking application a little bit, but how does this connect any principles to right now or to today? Certainly the emotion that Habakkuk is expressing here is very, very relatable in light of our quarantine season. But are you seeing other principles in here that would be very special or relevant?
I think one would be that Christians are not called to stoicism, especially about the injustice and hardship that's going on in the world. I mean, even you pointed this out, Dave, the word oracle means burden, right? This is a burden that he has on his heart, and you can obviously see that as you read it. And so I think that Christians are not called to be stoic and just have a stiff upper lip and get through it, but they're called really in the midst of hardship and sadness and difficulty as they look out in the world to really just to bring that before God.
Yep. I think it's also, I think it's okay that we are bothered when it seems like, you know, in here especially, when it seems like things in our culture are off, or that God's people don't seem to be obeying God. Something like that, like the idea of speaking to God, because Lord, you said that obedience to the law is good, right? And it seems like the law is paralyzed or frozen. And wicked people seem to be prospering, and there's this perversion of what you said was good. I think it's okay to be bothered when things seem to be breaking around us. I don't think sinfully bothered, but I think the emotion of there is right because we're made in the image of God, right?
But I think I'm challenged by that. Part of it, I think I've been soaking in Psalm 119, which is this love letter to God, you know, for his law. And just very challenged by, do I love God's law, God's word enough to be concerned that it's being broken? Or do I subtly, you know, encourage or enable sin, not just in myself, but in other people? But he's really, you know, and I think, you know, when he starts saying like violence and iniquity and destruction and strife and stuff, this is obviously very visible stuff going on, but that there's this deep sense that this is wrong, this is not right, and it should be addressed. I think I'm challenged by that. Do I love and know God's law enough to see and to be bothered when it's not that?
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's also challenging that this book does not address the people of Judah directly. So it seems like it is, I don't know much about Habakkuk, but it seems like the burden that he has and what we have written for us in the scriptures is how this man is going to go on a journey of actually learning, being schooled a bit in the justice of God, the purpose of God, and what it means to actually live as a person of God and live by faith, by living by faith and in troubled times. You know, God is going to bring salvation. God is going to bring about justice, but it's going to blow his mind because he is not God.
Yeah. What other application that I think comes out of this is that, you know, how much of my, you know, let me just use the word complaint, you know, about things that are going on is just to me, like I'm functionally praying to myself, you know, oh man, the weather's just been gnarly, blah, 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 you know, but I'm functionally, it's just internal, I'm just praying to myself versus, you know, Habakkuk is taking these very heavy things, much more significant than a discouragement with the weather or something, and he's taking them to the Lord. It's that Godward complaint, that Godward prayer. I think that would just very much change the way I interact with disappointment. You know, if I was thinking about, if the Lord was in view when I was thinking about those things.
Yeah, I think so. So instead of venting our frustrations, Brian, or maybe we could actually lament our frustrations to the Lord. Right. I think there's a difference between venting and having a legitimate prayer of sadness and cry for help. Even a cry for help about how we've been crying for help. Do you see that, verse 2? How long shall I cry for help? Part of what he's saying here is that he's been crying for help, right? So he's crying about his crying, and you're not hearing. So I think there's a real legitimacy to that. I think this is different from how we often seek to find comfort. I try to vent it. Like if I just vent it to people or whatever, or to myself, I think that's where we get maybe the grumbling and complaining.
Building on that, a thoughtful question we could ask ourselves today and this week is, when reality does not match up with the promises of God, what do we do?
Yeah.
And I think what Habakkuk directs us towards is just a thoughtful, deep lament when the promises of God are not seen with our eyes the way we expect them to be.
That's a great place to end, Ling, because I tell you, you tune in tomorrow because God is going to answer Habakkuk, right? And what we're going to get is almost this dialogue format a little bit. There's some dialogue in here of like a conversation with God that this prophet has, and God's answer. And I think this is one of the reasons Habakkuk, I'll give you a teaser here, is one of the reasons I think that the scripture really is the inspired word of God. Because if you were making this up, ain't nobody would have written Habakkuk, okay? But God's answer essentially is going to be, brace yourself, this is going to blow your mind. And that he is going to be true to himself as the Lord. It's going to be very, very appropriate, I think, for us right now today in terms of what we are dealing with right here and now.